All right, so one of my favorite quarterbacks of all time. You guys are in Esther chapter 10. One of my favorite quarterbacks of all time, Brett Favre. Brett Favre. I grew up watching the Lions, and then every now and then, because we lived on the Lake Michigan shoreline, we had an antenna, and we would turn our antenna toward Milwaukee, and we would watch the Green Bay Packers because I loved how Brett Favre played football. So here's just a little story about Brett Favre. I think it fits for where we're going today. Did you know that Brett Favre was actually drafted by the Atlanta Falcons in the second round of the draft? And he signed his first contract was a 3-year deal worth $1.4 million. And he had a signing bonus of a whopping $350,000. I'd take it. Sign me up. So here's the interesting part of Brett Favre's one season with the Atlanta Falcons. Their head coach did not approve of him being drafted. And he said these words, "It would take a plane crash for me to put Brett Favre into a football game." And so eventually there was not a plane crash, but he did get put into a football game. And it was an interception returned for a touchdown. And he only had 4 pass attempts that entire season. He was intercepted twice, and the other 2 were dropped. He took one other snap, and it was an 11-yard loss sack. That was Brett Favre's career with the Atlanta Falcons. Anyone want to sign up for that career? Nobody. So for the money, that's about it. Take 5 snaps, be unsuccessful, and make some cash. So he was traded to the Packers in '92, the year that I graduated high school. In the second game that he played, one half, he fumbled the ball 4 times, and the crowd chanted for him to be taken out of the game. Anyone want Brett Favre's football career up to that point? Doesn't look good. Later that season, so the turn comes. Later that season, Brett Favre put together this 6-game winning streak. That was the longest winning streak since 1965. And they did beat the Lions that year, and the Bears and some other teams. In the '93 season, Favre helped the Packers to the first playoff game since 1982. In '94, he was the first quarterback in decades to have back-to-back playoff years. And I say that because what times look like at the moment are not what times always have to end up as. Just because of where something is, isn't where it has to land. You will never, ever take a snap for this team, ever. Pack your bags, go. To being one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Somebody got that one wrong. Mordecai, we're going to see, Mordecai has words described as greatness and favor. But we're also going to see he didn't start there. And so let's read Esther chapter 10. It says these words, and then I'll pray. And King Xerxes imposed tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might on the account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Mede and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Xerxes, and was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitude of his brethren. The complete opposite of getting booed at Lambeau Field. Well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all his countrymen. So let's pray. God, thanks for today. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the story of Mordecai. God, we ask that you would teach us this morning that it's not always how we start. I mean, it's not really always how we end. It's the process of getting there. And God, remind us this morning that we're all in a process of transformation. And that there are toils and there are snares in life, but we can get through those things when we ask you to be part of our lives. And so, God, I ask this morning that you would speak to us, that you would make your presence known to us very clearly today. In Jesus' name, amen. So Mordecai, at the end of the story, Mordecai is known as greatness, second to only King Xerxes. And I want to walk back a little bit. Our main idea this morning is how we handle consistency and compromise will determine our future reputation. How we handle consistency and compromise. Compromise isn't always a bad thing. How we handle consistency and compromise will determine our future reputation. So I want us to go back to chapter 2 and look at verse 19. Where we kind of pick up the story at the early parts of Mordecai. It says, it's verse 19 through 23 says this. When virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat at the king's gate. Now maybe you remember, Mordecai sat at the king's gate often. That's where he was. His job was to be a recorder, to be like the court secretary. He was at the king's gate. That's not necessarily outside, like the fence on the edge of his property, more like the door. So he's watching what's going on. Now Esther had not revealed her family to her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Xerxes. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an injury was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicle in the presence of the king. So how we handle consistency and compromise will determine our future reputation. We're going to see 4 steps. We're going to see the process of Mordecai getting from chapter 2 to chapter 10. There are 4 steps that happened. So here the first step, the first step is Mordecai was faithful. Maybe Jordan will flip that slide. Mordecai was faithful to the mission placed before him. Mordecai was faithful to the mission placed before him. In this particular section of Esther 2, Mordecai is not in his hometown. He is in exile. He's living in someone else. I would suggest he's living out someone else's mission. He's at the king's gate. He's a recorder. He's making sure things go about, and he's living out someone else's mission. If you have a boss, if you are an employee and not an employer, you are living out someone else's mission. If you are a child in your parents' home, it is possible that you're living out someone else's mission. If you receive government assistance, Social Security, it's possible that you're living out someone else's mission. There are all different sorts of ways that we as Americans live out someone else's mission. And I want us to see first and foremost, that Mordecai was faithful. Totally not, he didn't even waver. It was it. He just went to work. He did his job. A job, maybe he liked it, maybe he didn't. But he went there every day and he had the king's back. He had the king's back. He was faithful. When someone was coming to get, someone wanted to do harm to the person that laid out the mission, Mordecai took care of him. This little thing that went unseen, we learned throughout Esther that this went unnoticed for 5 years. It went unnoticed for quite a while. He just did his thing, and he didn't worry about it. And so, as Mordecai was faithful to the mission placed before him, I want to ask us this morning, are we faithful to the mission? Are we faithful to the place? So interestingly enough, this morning, one of my Facebook memories was this picture that I took, a letter from a 5th grade student. I was a substitute teacher for a 5th grade class one year. The teacher went on maternity leave from October until fall break. And I filled in. I was there in the classroom. So I became the long-term substitute teacher for like 58 5th graders. Hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And so one thing that someone taught me years and years ago was blossom where you are planted. Blossom where you're planted. Wherever God happens to put you in the moment, grow and bear fruit. So this picture was this girl, this student, had written this nice little note to me as her substitute teacher about, I'm so glad that you are my teacher. I love coming to school and learning from you every day. You make me want to be a better person. Like, that's this. Mordecai, I believe Mordecai went to work and showed up and made a difference in people's lives. And I think there are people that wanted to be a better person because Mordecai was in their lives, even at those early stages of the book. Blossom where you're planted. If you check out right now, you're like, what's for lunch? What am I doing today? Do I have everything in order for school for the week? Am I driving off to Lansing? What am I doing later today? If you check out, if you don't remember anything else, blossom where you are planted. Be faithful. Be faithful to where you are planted, even in the little things. Whatever the mission that is given to you or you set forth, be faithful. Because people will notice. People will notice your consistency and whether or not you compromise where you are. Flip over to chapter 3. Verse 1. Here we're going to see that Mordecai lived a consistent life. You can be faithful when you have to be, and still not be consistent. I had Some of you know, Bridget and I were store managers when we got married. I had a supervisor that said, it doesn't matter what you do in this company as long as you do the right thing in front of the right people. I'm not even joking. The guy was a high up in McDonald's organization, and he said, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you do the right thing in front of the right people so the right people notice you do the right thing. That's how you get promoted in corporate America. Like, I'm a 21-year-old kid at that point. Don't tell me stuff like that, because I'm going to do it. You can be faithful and not be consistent. Here's chapter 3, verse 1. After these things, King Xerxes promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the servants and all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not pay homage to him, Mordecai was filled with wrath. We've studied, the rest of the story. Consistency. Haman knew. When I see Mordecai today, he's not going to bow to me. He will bow to his God. He will bow to King Xerxes. He's not bowing to anybody else. He won't even think about it. And all the king's employees knew it. Haman hated it. In fact, it's the reason why Haman wanted to kill him. And Mordecai went on and went on and went on. Anyway, there was no question about whether or not Mordecai was consistent. Mordecai was faithful in the mission given to him. Mordecai was consistent always. It's kind of a redundant term. Consistent always. Here's the third one. Chapter 4. Flip over to chapter 4. Verse 1 and 2 says this. The third step in the process we're going to see is Mordecai valued humility. And we've looked at this and we've seen the contrast of Mordecai versus Haman, and pride versus humility. And we've looked over all of that, but I want to just revisit it quickly. Chapter 4, verse 1 and 2. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and he put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. You may recall, I don't expect you to because this was a long time ago, that we talked about when you tear your clothes and you put on sackcloth and ashes, that's a posture of mourning. That's a posture of, I don't like what's currently going on in my life, and I'm going to do this until something changes. And he went our text says, he went in the public streets, and he mourned, and he cried out, and I believe he planned on doing this for the next 11 months. Until he saw a change, and he didn't care. He did not care who noticed. He did not care who ridiculed him. He did not care what people thought of him at all. He was going to mourn publicly because he valued humility. He valued humility. And so I want to ask, I want us to consider, are you faithful? Are you faithful in the mission that God has given you? Are you working to blossom where you have been planted? Are you consistent? There's this line that's gone on throughout our house for the last several years. It's always a teaching moment. Bridget is really good at correcting this statement. It's only cheating if you get caught. Anyone ever hear that line before? Back up to the supervisor that said to me, if you want to get promoted, just do the right thing in front of the right people. It doesn't matter what you do the rest of the time. We can be faithful and not be consistent, and I will just offer to you. Faithfulness only when it matters is not consistency, and it really kind of slaps God in the face. God has put us here to live a mission and do a work, and if we're not trying to blossom where we're planted all the time the best we can, we're mocking the one who created us, because I think it says, I have a better plan than you have, God. We're not perfect. Anyone perfect? Anyone sin this week? Anyone open their mouth and wish they could take back what came out? All the time. Okay, but we can be faithful, and we can strive towards consistency, and we can do it in a manner that values humility. Values humility. It's easy for us to say, I think it's easier for us to say what humility is not than what it is. You know a person, you can identify a person like that doesn't bear humility. You know, and you're like, I want to avoid that person. That's probably the person you avoid at the grocery store. Like, I just want to get away from that person. Humility is this: making decisions against myself. Making decisions against myself. I don't have to be right. I don't have to win the conversation. I was in a conversation a week and a half ago with a group of pastors in the area, and we were talking about what is good leadership in a church. That was the context of our conversation. And one of the pastors, there were 5 of us in the room, and one of them said, I think good leadership is creating opportunities where other people can be right. I don't have to have the final decision. And I say that I looked at him and I thought, I want to learn from him more. He's in his 60s and he's been a pastor for a long time, but he values humility. And I sat in that room in my chair and I thought, I'm not there. I'm probably not where I need to be, just like you're probably not where you need to be. And pride creeps in and we want to be seen. But here Mordecai went on a public mourning spree and didn't care who saw it. And he went as far as he possibly could to the king's gate without offending people. For no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. Be careful in your pursuit of humility that you don't act, that you just be careful. I'm not going to say what I wanted to say very well at all. It wasn't coming out. Be careful how you pursue humility, that you don't run other people over. Because we can. Here's the fourth one. Flip over to chapter 6. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. I want us also to see that Mordecai was a patient person. Take a vote. I think they're a patient person. Nobody raised their hand. If you're watching online and you think you're a patient person, go ahead and just tell us. Comment. So here's chapter 6, verse 1 through 3 says this. That night the king could not sleep. So we're picking up where they're in between the two banquets. That night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeeper who had sought to lay hands on King Xerxes. Then the king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." Nothing. That would be comparable to being the lead salesperson in your company for the entire year, no bonus. There you go. Verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, after the great puff myself up conversation, then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you've suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you've spoken." So Haman, swallowing his pride, took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Mordecai was patient. 5 years had gone by since that event to where the king actually rewarded him for it. From studying the book of Mordecai, I would suggest to you that another 10 years could have gone by and Mordecai would have never said anything. He would have been faithful. He would have been consistent. He would have lived in humility, and he would have continued to wait without saying anything for what he deserved. No lawyer commercial here. There's no lawyer commercial. I'm going to just give you what you deserve. Come and call me. I will fight for you. I will get you 6, 7, 8 digits. Whatever you want to make you happy. Not Mordecai. Mordecai was a patient person. We probably could all agree that being a patient person that's hard. That's hard. People say things we don't like. We turn the news and it makes us mad. We watch sporting events that we think the TV responds, and so we yell louder at it. Not in our house. We expect people to drop whatever they're doing to take care of our needs because we're selfish people. And we work on patience. We try to work on patience, or we ignore patience and just say it will never be part of my life. And we give up. We give up. And I want us to learn here from Mordecai. And I want us to think about, don't give up. If we give up on the patience, so look around the auditorium just for a minute. Okay, if we give up on patience, this is all that we are, right here. If we are not patient, if we are not faithful, if we are not consistent, if we do not live with humility, and if we don't just keep pressing forward patiently within God's timing, this is all we ever are right here. Because as Mordecai waited for what he was do, the faithful toil of blossoming where we are planted shows up eventually, but maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not even next month. Maybe not even in 6 months from now, but it will happen eventually. And we have to keep pressing forward. And so chapter 10, let's go back to chapter 10. We're fast forwarding a lot from chapter 2 to chapter 10, and the king imposed tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might, and the account of the greatness of Mordecai. Like, you can circle that word, greatness. The greatness of Mordecai to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of the Medes and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Xerxes and was great among the Jews and well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to all his countrymen. Here's what I don't want you to walk out of this auditorium with this morning. This is, don't walk out of this. This is not the example of, oh man, if I just try to be faithful, if I try to be consistent, if I try to be humble all the time, and if I try to be patient, God is going to give me this status like nobody else. God's going to make me number 2. I'm going to be vice president. I'm going to get promoted, be the VP of my company, and it's just, I'm going to be this guy with a high influence. Don't go there. Don't go there. Now this, in Mordecai's life, it happened to be that he was number 2 in the kingdom. But I want us to see being number 2 in the kingdom means that God is number 1 in the kingdom. The king is number 1 in the kingdom. And the only way that I can be great, and that you can be great, and that our church can be great, is if the king is in his rightful seat. And Mordecai did great things with his life. He was well respected. He was well received. He was a man of influence. And his reputation is finally recognized. That took a long time. And we are having conversations with people in our community. Oh, I finally know where your church is. And I thought, I've had conversations with people. I drive by your church every day, and I thought, I didn't even know it still existed. We're in the process phase of faithfulness, consistency, humility, patience, because at some point in the future, our toil is going to pay off. And the important part is the king keeps his rightful seat. The king keeps his rightful seat, and I keep my rightful seat, and you keep your rightful seat. And when we understand what seat we're in, these 4 steps in the process will happen in our lives. But I want to tell you, if Jesus is not in your life, if you have never given your life to Jesus Christ, you are the king. You're your own king. There is no king. It's do what's right in my own eyes. And if it feels good, do it. And I don't care what anyone else thinks, because I don't have a standard of living. It's my own standard. I create it as I go along. It is the home version of Monopoly. I make up the rules as you go along. Because I make up the rules. When I was a kid and I played Monopoly and I just had the chance to make up the rules, I made up rules that benefited me. Like, I'm not going to make up rules that benefited my brothers. They could win anyway. They have their own ways of cheating that we won't talk about. But it's a good example that when Jesus is not in our lives, when we are not seeking to walk with him daily, we are our own king. And we have to come to a point in our lives where Jesus is king and Jesus is in the right seat, and we take that seriously and we get in the second chair. And we are the passenger. And that's how we will prosper. That is how we are able to be faithful and consistent and humble and patient. Will God make you great in your life? He might. Will God give you a large circle of influence? He might. Will he give you a small circle of influence? Maybe. Will he give you the courage and the boldness to blossom where you are planted every day of your lives? Yes. Guaranteed. Take it to the bank. When we walk with Christ, we are able to blossom where we are planted. That, friends, is the story of Esther and Mordecai.